The crowd in St. Peter's Square fell silent as 8-year-old Sophia Russo trembled at the edge of the security barrier. Her small hand clutched a homemade rosary, fingers shaking as the Pope-mobile approached. This was her moment, the one she'd prayed for. As Pope Leo XIV's vehicle slowed, Sophia locked eyes with Marco Vincenti, a young Swiss guard walking beside the vehicle. She placed her hand on her heart, then pointed urgently toward the sea of people behind her. The Swiss guard hesitated for only a second before breaking ranks. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories of faith and incredible moments that change lives, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. The May sun beat down on St. Peter's Square as thousands gathered for Pope Leo XIV's weekly Wednesday audience. The atmosphere was electric. This was, after all, the first American pope in the Church's 2,000-year history, and just 7. Days after his historic election, the faithful had flocked from across the globe to catch a glimpse of the former Cardinal Robert Prevost. Among them stood Sophia Russo, her mother Elena, clutching her hand tightly as they pressed against the security barrier. They had traveled all the way from Naples for this moment, a journey that meant more to them than anyone in the crowd could possibly know. "Remember what we practiced, Sophia," Elena whispered, smoothing her daughter's dark curls. "But remember, also what I told you. It's very unlikely he'll stop. There are thousands of people here." Sophia nodded solemnly, her large brown eyes fixed on the distant figure in white as the Pope-mobile began its slow procession through the crowd. In her small hands, she clutched a handmade rosary, each bead carefully strung by her own fingers, the cross a simple wooden one her grandfather had carved before he passed away 3 months earlier. But this was not just any grandfather. Matteo Russo had been a Vatican gardener for 45 years, serving under 5 popes. And before his death, he had formed an unexpected friendship with then Cardinal Prevost during the Americans' visits to Rome. They would speak in the gardens while Matteo tended the flowers, conversations that ranged from theology to their shared love of baseball. The Cardinal, a devoted White Sox fan, Matteo falling in love with the sport through his American friends' stories. On his deathbed, Matteo had given Sophia a mission. "When the next pope is chosen," he had whispered weakly, "I want you to give him this." He had pressed a small package into her hands. "Promise me, Piccola." She had promised, never imagining that her grandfather's American friend would soon be elected to the chair of St. Peter. Now, as the Pope-mobile drew closer, Sophia felt the weight of that package in her pocket. The Swiss guards walked in perfect formation alongside the Pope's vehicle, their distinctive blue, red, and yellow uniforms standing out sharply against the sea of civilian clothes. Their eyes constantly scanned the crowd, vigilant for any potential threat to the Holy Father. Marco Vincenti had been a member of the Pontifical Swiss Guard for only 7 months. At 23, he was one of the youngest guards in the Corps, but his dedication and attention to detail had quickly earned him a position in the Pope's security detail. Born in Lugano, Switzerland, to a family with a proud military tradition, Marco had felt called to serve the Church in this unique capacity. Marco walked with measured steps beside the Pope-mobile, his face a mask of discipline. His training had been rigorous. Combat techniques, crowd control, and above all, unwavering adherence to protocol. The first rule, never break formation unless responding to a clear security threat. As the Pope-mobile approached Sophia's section of the barrier, Pope Leo XIV waved to the faithful, his warm smile capturing the charisma that had endeared him to Catholics around the world. The former Cardinal Prevost had spent years as a missionary in Peru before Pope Francis had called him to serve in the Vatican. His humility and pastoral approach reflected his predecessor's vision, though observers had noted a slightly more traditional bent to his early homilies. Sophia's heart pounded as the Pope drew nearer. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to fulfill her promise to her grandfather. She squeezed her mother's hand once, then raised the rosary high above her head, hoping to catch the Pope's attention. But the crowd was thick, the noise overwhelming. Hundreds of hands reached out, voices called, and children were lifted onto shoulders. Sophia's small frame and quiet devotion were lost in the tumult. Tears welled in her eyes as the Pope-mobile began to pass her by. The Pope hadn't seen her. She wouldn't be able to fulfill her promise. That's when Sophia remembered what her grandfather had told her about the Swiss Guard, how their vigilant eyes missed nothing, how they served not just as protectors, but as the Pope's extended senses in the crowd. Her gaze landed on the young guard, walking just a few feet away, Marco Vincenti. In desperation, Sophia made the sign her grandfather had taught her, hand to heart, then a pointed gesture toward herself. It was an old signal, Matteo had explained, one used by Vatican staff for generations when they needed to convey an urgent but private message to the papal household. Marco's eyes widened slightly as he recognized the signal, one taught to the Swiss Guard during their training but rarely seen in modern times. His training told him to alert his superior to follow protocol. But something about the little girl's desperate eyes made him hesitate. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as a moment of divine prompting. Marco Vincenti broke formation. In 3 quick strides, he was at the barrier, bending down to Sophia's level. "What is it, little one?" he asked quietly, aware that his action was being noticed by his fellow guards. "Please," Sophia whispered, urgently. "I must give something to the Holy Father. My grandfather was Matteo Russo, the gardener. He was friends with Pope Leo when he was a cardinal. Before he died, Nonno made me promise." Marco's breath caught. Every Swiss guard knew Matteo Russo, the kind-eyed gardener who had been as much a fixture of Vatican life as the statues and fountains. They had attended his funeral, standing at attention as the man who had tended the Pope's gardens for nearly half a century was laid to rest. In that split second, Marco made a decision that could end his career. He signaled to the Pope-mobile driver to stop, a breach of protocol so serious that his commander was already moving toward him, face darkening with concern. Pope Leo XIV noticed the commotion and leaned forward, his eyes finding Marco and then tracking to the small girl with the rosary. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps. "Your Holiness," Marco said formally, approaching the vehicle. "There is a child here, the granddaughter of Matteo Russo." At the mention of that name, the Pope's expression softened, visibly. "Matteo, bring her to me." Marco returned to Sophia, who now stood trembling with nervous energy. "His Holiness wishes to meet you," he said gently, offering his hand. "May I lift you over the barrier?" Elena nodded her permission, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter being carefully lifted across the security line by the Swiss Guard. The crowd fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Marco led Sophia to the Pope-mobile, aware that cameras were capturing every moment. The Pope's security detail had formed a protective circle, still clearly unhappy with this breach of protocol but deferring to the Holy Father's evident wish. Sophia stood before Pope Leo XIV, her small face upturned to meet his gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. "Hello, Sophia," the Pope said finally, his voice gentle. "I remember you from the photographs your grandfather showed me. You've grown so much." Sophia's eyes widened in surprise. "You remember me, Holy Father?" "Of course," he smiled. "Your grandfather was very proud of you. He told me you were making him a special rosary." Sophia nodded and held up the handmade string of beads. "I finished it before he went to heaven. He said I should give it to the next pope." Her voice quavered. I didn't know it would be you." The Pope's eyes misted as he accepted the rosary, running his fingers reverently over the simple beads. "This is a treasure, Sophia. I will keep it close to my heart." Sophia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, carefully wrapped package. "Nono also asked me to give you this. He said you would understand." Pope Leo XIV unwrapped the package with careful fingers. Inside was a single baseball, worn from use, its leather cracked with age. A baseball from Comiskey Park, home of his beloved Chicago White Sox, with signatures that had faded but remained legible. It was from the 1959 team, the last white Sox team to reach the World Series before their 2005 championship. The Pope held the ball as if it were made of precious crystal, turning it slowly in his hands. "We watched that series together on my tablet," he said softly. "Your grandfather became quite the baseball fan." Sophia nodded. "He said it was like life. You have to keep swinging even when you miss." A murmur ran through the crowd as the Pope laughed, a warm, genuine sound that carried across the square. "Matteo's wisdom," he said, still smiling. "He taught me far more than I taught him." The Pope looked at Marco, still standing protectively beside Sophia. "Thank you, Guardvincenti, for recognizing what was important. Sometimes protocol must bend to accommodate matters of the heart." Marco bowed his head respectfully, relief washing over him. His commander's expression had softened somewhat, though there would certainly be discussions later. Pope Leo XIV turned his attention back to Sophia. "Your grandfather had a special place in the gardens, a bench beneath the old olive tree where we would talk. Do you know it?" Sophia nodded. "He took me there whenever we visited. He said it was where he felt closest to God." "This Sunday, after Mass, would you and your mother join me there? I think Matteo would like that." Sophia's face lit up with joy. "Yes, Holy Father, Nono would like that very much." The Pope made the sign of the cross over Sophia, blessing her. "Faith and friendship," he said, "are the truest treasures we possess in this life. Your grandfather understood that well." As Marco helped Sophia back to her mother, the crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment that would soon be shared across the globe. The American Pope, the Swiss Guard, and the little girl with a promise to keep. The Pope mobile resumed its route through St. Peter's Square, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. People weren't just seeing their new Pope. They were witnessing the human connection that transcended formal roles and rigid protocols. For Marco Vincenti, the incident marked a turning point. Rather than being reprimanded for breaking protocol, his action was recognized as an example of discernment and compassion. Pope Leo XIV would later establish a foundation in Matteo Russo's name to support the families of Vatican employees, with Marco appointed to its advisory board. Elena embraced her daughter as she returned, both of them watching through tears. As the Pope continued his procession, the simple handmade rosary now draped over his wrist, the baseball carefully tucked into the pocket of his white cassock. "Did I do what Nono wanted?" Sophia asked, looking up at her mother. "You did more than that, amore mio," Elena replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "You reminded everyone that behind all the ceremony and tradition, faith is about connection to each other and to God." That Sunday, in the Vatican Gardens, Pope Leo XIV sat on Matteo's bench with Sophia and Elena. They shared stories, laughed, and finally prayed together beneath the ancient olive tree. The Pope taught Sophia how to throw a proper curveball, using Matteo's treasured baseball. And Elena revealed that she was expecting another child, a boy they planned to name Matteo. Word of what happened that Wednesday spread quickly, inspiring Catholics around the world. Letters poured into the Vatican, stories of family connections, of promises kept, of faith passed down through generations. Pope Leo XIV read each one, often referencing them in his homilies. In his first major address as Pope, he spoke about the wisdom found in unexpected places and the importance of seeing each person as an individual rather than part of an anonymous crowd. Sometimes, he said, God speaks to us through the smallest voices. We must be ready to listen, even when it requires us to step outside our comfortable routines. The image of Sophia and Marco became iconic, a symbol of Pope Leo XIV's papacy that emphasized personal connection alongside tradition. Reproductions appeared on prayer cards and medallions, a reminder that the Church was not just an institution, but a family. As for Sophia's handmade rosary, it remained with the Pope, often seen wrapped around his wrist during important prayers. In interviews, when asked about his most treasured possession, Pope Leo XIV would hold up those simple beads and say, "This reminds me daily of what matters most. Faith expressed through love and promises kept." 1 year later, on the anniversary of that Wednesday audience, the Vatican announced the canonization process for a 20th century Italian layperson known for their humble service. The first such cause initiated under Pope Leo XIV's papacy. The postulator appointed to investigate the case was Elena Russo, whose background in church history made her uniquely qualified for the role. And Marco Vincenti. He continued his service in the Swiss Guard, eventually becoming an instructor, who emphasized not just protocol but discernment. "Rules exist to serve people," he would tell the new recruits, "not the other way around." In the Vatican gardens, Matteo's bench was marked with a small plaque that bore no name or date, just a simple engraving of a rosary entwined with a baseball. It became a place where visitors would stop to pray, somehow sensing the significance of that quiet spot beneath the olive tree. Sophia grew into a young woman who visited the Vatican often, sometimes sitting with the Pope on her grandfather's bench, discussing faith and life, and, occasionally, baseball statistics. Their friendship remained a testament to the connection that had begun with a desperate signal and a Swiss guard who understood that some protocols are meant to be broken. In Catholic churches around the world, the story is still told of the little girl, the Swiss guard, and the newly elected Pope who reminded everyone that at the heart of faith lies human connection. It has inspired countless acts of compassion and courage, moments when people chose love over rigid adherence to rules. And in the Swiss Guard barracks, a painting now hangs in the common room, an artist's rendering of that moment when Sophia's hand signal was answered. Beneath it, inscribed in Latin, are the words that have become a principle of their service. Vigilance sees not just danger, but also need. True protection encompasses both. For all the grand ceremonies and ancient traditions that define the Vatican, it was this simple human moment that came to symbolize Pope Leo XIV's vision for the Church, one where protocol serves compassion, where no voice is too small to be heard, and where promises made in love are sacred obligations. As Pope Leo XIV often said, holding Sophia's rosary during difficult meetings or decisions, God's most important messages often come to us through the most unexpected messengers. We need only the wisdom to recognize them and the courage to respond. And respond he did on that sunny Wednesday in St. Peter's Square, when a little girl gave a signal, a Swiss guard broke protocol, and the world glimpsed the heart of faith beating beneath the mantle of tradition.